Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
So this is what it looks like, and I have transferred my dart markings to the wrong side, I learned this time, of this piece, and over here my facing was wide enough that I was able to secure it over here, which is actually really good because this is where I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of bound buttonhole stuff, so it's good that it has that to keep it from wanting to move on me. But I'm going to go ahead and on both of my blue front pieces make these darts up just like I did on the lining. Okay, so now I need to start working on my bound buttonholes, and the way that this pattern does bound buttonholes is actually different than the way I usually do. I use a different way. I have actually, there's a playlist on making the cardigan jacket, and in there there's an entire video on making bound buttonholes that shows a different method. But we are going to follow their method because that's what is in the pattern, and we might as well. So the pattern comes with this piece number 6, okay? And I need to duplicate these buttonholes on the wrong side of these two pieces of fabric, right? So I am just kind of measuring them, and it looks like from this side I have 7/8 of an inch from the edge, and on this side 7/8 of an inch from the edge. So I'm just going to start that, and let's see here, so I can just draw it straight down like this using big lines. I hope you can see that on either side because this is going to get folded in and pressed out and everything, so it's okay that, oopsie, that my lines are a little long. So let me finish this part here. From the top I have, looks like 1 5/8. And then my buttonhole itself is a 1/4 inch, so I can barely see it, but I can use that line I just drew and draw a 1/4 inch underneath it. Okay, so you can see hopefully better this way. And I'm going to do that for the other one, measure down from here, draw another 2 lines. So I should end up with 2 pieces with this layout. Okay, so I was having trouble seeing with this, so I just went over it with white chalk really quick, and I decided to make the spacing slightly higher, so mine are 3 inches apart instead of 3 1/8 inch apart. But you can get the idea, that's what it is. So I moved up the bottom 1 1/8 of an inch just to make life easy on myself. Alright, so on my main pattern, I am marking the beginning and end of the buttonhole placement, and I lowered this one by 1/8 of an inch because that's what I did. Actually, I raised it 1/8 of an inch. Tell you what, we're just going to mark this top one. I can gauge the bottom one from the top one. So this is my piece, and I'm going to be placing them right sides together. But what I need to do is put a pin in the center of this square, right on the edge here in the center of it, and that should line up with this circle right here. Okay, so I'm just going to push that one all the way through, and the same thing over here, put a pin in the very center of this, and that should match up on this side. All right, So now that I have those kind of there stabilizing it, I'm going to go ahead and pin this whole little piece down so that I can see it from this side. Pull these pins out now. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side with my other piece. And then before I stitch anything, I'm going to lay these next to each other and compare to make sure that they're placed in the right place. All right, so these are my two pieces here. Let me scoot you back. And I laid them so that both of the little swoop parts are on my grid at the same place. So I can lay my ruler down and make sure that everything is straight. And it actually looks like I might want to adjust something very carefully. So you know what, I'm going to get a separate colored chunk. Let's get yellow this time, huh? So I'm going to make the yellow line my dominant line here, just to make sure that they are 100% straight. Okay, so on my very sloppy yellow lines, still using the same crosshatch lines up here, I need to stitch all the way around, and I need to use a pretty small stitch length, you know, probably about a 1.5 or so on my machine, to go all the way around here and make a little square out of all of these. So got these stitched around. You can see better this way, okay, but I've got them stitched on both sides. Don't need to worry about cleaning off the chalk because that'll be on the inside. And I'm going to cut these two apart so we can handle them separately. Now, because it's so much easier to see it from the wrong side, that's what I'm going to look at. I need to cut this open. And like everything, I'm going to draw myself a guideline just so I can be sure I'm on the right track. So this is a 1/4 inch, so I'm drawing my guideline so I have 1/8 of an inch on each side and giving little triangle marks there. And use whatever you can that's excuse me, super sharp. I think what I'm going to do is start it off with my buttonhole chisel, because I can get a precise little cut that way, and then use scissors to trim the little pieces up here. So let's see. And clip all the way to the corner, but don't clip the stitching. I think these scissors are starting to wear out. I've had them a long time. Okay, so I'll do all of them, but I just want to show on this one. So now we can poke all of this through the buttonhole. Okay, and on this side, open up where this 1/8 inch is there. I'm going to leave that up and put the little piece of fabric around it. Okay, so from this side, then I see that. The same thing with the top one. Let that little 1/8 inch poke back down and fold the fabric up over it. Just kind of get these situated. So from the right side, it's going to look, well, I can adjust it just a bit, and I will be hand stitching some things down, but it'll look fairly like a hand bound buttonhole here. Let me go ahead, do some adjusting, some stitching, some tidying up back here. But basically, once I get this inside how I like it, and can't find my little but what I want is I want these little corners that I made to tuck completely over to the side. I don't want any of that visible. All right. Once this looks good, and know that there will be a button on top of it, so it's not, you know, it has to be perfect. It does not, but it should be close. I'm going to get just a needle and thread, and I am going to stitch it together just to hold it in place while I do everything else. So this will be like a basting thread that will come off later, but for right now, I'm just kind of taking a few diagonal stitches. Whoopsie, there goes my thimble and my needle. It all went kaput. But here, just taking some diagonal stitches, going across, and I will rethread that needle and go all the way across just to hold it secure and hold it closed while I work with everything else. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do with this one, and then do the same thing with this one and both of them on the other side. So once I have it stitched up all the way across, that's what it looks like. I just took a little back stitch on this side over here to keep it secure, but not so bad that when it's time to pull that thread out, it's difficult, okay? So anyhow, that's what it looks like. I'm gonna go do this one. Okay, so now that that part is done, I need to come back here on the wrong side, outside of where my buttonhole is, so like right around here. If I stick my needle from the bottom, I can make sure I'm on the outside of it, okay? And I'm going to have these two little folds, and I need to stitch those two little folds together just so they're going to want to stay in that place. I'm probably going to come out maybe about a 1/4 inch, just going back and forth over them like this. Okay, as you can see, I'm just kind of tacking them in just so that they're going to want to stay put. And then make one more back stitch, one sideways to lock it. Come on. Like that. Trim it off, and then I need to do the same thing on this side over here. So again, I'm going to make sure that my little folds are where they need to be, like this. And make sure that I actually start stitching right here. You know, you don't want to stitch your buttonhole closed. Now let me tie a knot here on my thread. Put my needle up where it needs to be. And then just make more little stitches right here just to hold those securely. And I'm only going through this little buttonhole fabric. I'm not going through the interfacing or the other fabric at this point. Okay, so it's about like that. I'm going to do one more little stitch and then a sideways one. Oops, that happens. Pull it tight and clip it. Okay, so now if I press this, go to the ironing board and press this, it should behave itself enough to be able to go on to the next step. Okay, so this is my outside, still stitched together. This is my back side. Now I wanted to show you, in the instructions they want you to trim this down closer, but I did not. I just felt like because of the thickness of my fabric and everything, it would be better to keep it out. But what I did do is use some stitch witchery, because I'm fusing it to this interface panel. I'm not fusing it directly to my fashion fabric. It shouldn't pull or anything like that. So I fused all of this to the interfacing, the woven interfacing, and that's going to keep it nice and neat. And it smooths out, in my opinion, at least on this fabric in particular, it smooths out the bulk far enough away from the buttonholes that it's going to make it easier to put together. I was concerned that if I trimmed it really closely, it would end up kind of like with a line right around here where all the thickness comes. So, okay, so with that center front piece set aside now, this is the side front piece. And it has a big dart. Surprise, surprise. This dress is full of really curious darts right here. And I need to make this dart before I can attach it to the front piece. And it makes like a princess seam when everything is done. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is, of course, punch out all the circles and markings for this dart. I will be clipping all of my notches as I mark this because I don't have my bottom attached. Actually, I'm just going to pull that off really quick here. Okay. So I will just mark up the blue part at this point, and I will do the same thing to the lining in a little bit. But the first thing I need to do is punch out all of these little circles for my, ooh, that could have been dangerous, for my dart. And I need to mark this on the wrong side, and right now it's my right side that's showing. So I'm going to be opening this up and marking each piece individually, all the dots, and then drawing the legs to draw out my dart markings on the pattern pieces. All right, so I have got my little notches clipped. There's a couple up here around the seam and one below, and this is my dart. So there's a top dot, middle dots, and the bottom. Now you only sew to the bottom dots. You don't go all the way to the edge. Cool, hush. So again, I'm putting my pin straight down one dot and up the next one. I'm going to do that for this little dot also, which I can barely see because I drew yellow chalk right over the top. And even that up, come to the point up here, and that gives me the stitching line to go ahead and sew from this point all the way up to the tip. And I'm going to do this for both of the blue ones and the white ones. And I will be serging all the way around to the outside edge of the white ones before I actually sew the darts. But this is the process. I'm going to do this on all 4 pieces, and I'll be right back. All right, so I have this dart put in, and these little red marks are actually where my notches are. I just didn't want to clip into this because it frays so much. But before I sew the 2 panels together, I need to stay stitch between this dart coming up this way and between this notch, and this dart going back down there. So a row of stay stitching at about 1/2 inch all the way right there. Okay, so these are my 2 front pieces, and this is roughly how they're going to go together here. So I just need to start matching up. It looks like my little dart line. The little red marks are my notches. So first I'm going to match those up and match up this very top corner right here. This is like a princess seam here, so I'm going to match. In the princess seam, there's always a top notch and a bottom notch between where the big curve is, and so this is the bottom notch here. I'm matching those up, and let's see if we can make this just kind of spread out. Hopefully we won't have to clip it, and it looks like it will just kind of curve out there. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the little curved part here of this princess seam. And then down here where we stay stitched, we're going to have to make some clips here because this part where the stay stitching is relatively normal, but the part that we are connecting it to is very not normal. Okay, so let's just go down as far as I can normal wise, which is right about to where all of this starts, where the big dart ended. Put a couple pins here. Okay, and let me match up the bottom notch, which is down here. So with that bottom notch pinned right there, then I can see where all of this is going to have to go. And actually, this taffeta is flexing very nicely. Very nicely. I may not even have to clip it. I'm just going to kind of push it into shape here. I think because it's so ridged, you know, it's got all kinds of little ribbing ridges on it, it gives it more flexibility, which is very nice right now, I must say. So, and then after this point, I'm just going to go straight down to the bottom edge here. And I will be sewing this at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and after I sew it, I believe I'll press it open, but for right now, let's just sew it and see what that looks like. All right, so while I have these done, and yes, I did press the seam open after I sewed it, I'm going to go ahead and sew the shoulder seams and the side seams of the fronts to the backs. And that way I think that we'll be able to get a pretty good look at what this is going to shape up like and deal with some of these really strange curves here. So I'm going to start on the side seam actually and just match them up. There's a couple notches down here. Sew it down at 5/8 inch and press it open like that. Okay, so trying to make sense of these shoulders. If you remember when I was putting this on, it didn't line up quite right, and I was having trouble figuring out why. And so we're just going to kind of work around this big little hump there. So I'm going to start up at the very top of my collar, put a pin up here, and where the white and blue kind of meet, there was a strange intersection kind of point. That should line up with this point right here, where everything comes together. And from this side, oops, just ignore that thread, it's going to be like right here. So I'm going to make a little mark so I remember that's the point I need to hit. So I'm going to put a pin there. I have a lot of layers going on here. Okay, and then I'm going to stretch this little piece all the way out to the end of the shoulder down here. And just kind of work around this little hump, just kind of splitting the difference there. It's going to stick out a little bit, but I'm going to just kind of average it in as I sew. And fortunately, unfortunately, it's the exact same way on both sides of the lining and on the fashion fabric part. So no matter what I do, it will end up being the same on all the parts, so kind of symmetrical. So this is how it turned out on this side. I did already sew it, and you can see that same little part is bumping up there. But when I turn it right side out, this is what it looks like. This is my collar area, and I will be pressing this. But I just wanted to show you it does work okay. You know, it just looks a little wonky on this side. All right, so with the shoulders and side seams sewn, this is what the lining looks like right now. This is the facing, and it still has the back dart sewn together. We have the princess seam, we have a dart here, there's a dart here, okay, right here. I don't know if you can see that. We have this really wide curve in the back. That's the neck, shoulder darts, more darts, more darts. This, I need to pull this basting out. I will do that tomorrow. Everything, but let me stand back so you can see. Well, pretend that collar has not flopped over. But so far I think it's a really cute shape. So I will put together the front to back of the blue part in the morning. See you then. Bye-bye. All right, so this is the, obviously, blue piece, and I'm going to be doing it the same way. And I actually already did the first side. This is the second side I'm doing on the blue. And I have had to make a lot more clips on this one, just because this is not, even though it's kind of knit-ish with that suede stuff, it's very sturdy and it did not want to bend like the white one. So this was a lot more tricky. And I had to do a lot more clipping, and I will with this one also. But also this corner right here on this fabric, it didn't work right. So what I had to do is kind of pick out my stitches and then baste it by hand when I did the first side, just so that I can get everything to line up right, basting it by hand, and then I was able to come and stitch it. So this time, I'm gonna baste this part by hand first before I even go over to the sewing machine. So what I'm gonna do is line up, just like before, all of the notches and everything like that. But when I get to this whole little intersection, because I'm dealing on this side with my buttonholes, and I have my interfacing, and I have this weird corner and everything, I'm going to work this all out, baste it in by hand, probably up to about here. And then, actually, you know what? I might do the entire side, because this princess seam up here, it does have quite an extreme curve, and there was a whole lot of clipping here too. So even though this is not terribly necessary, I think I will just go ahead and baste at least up to the top notch, because this is where the majority of all the curve is like right there. I wanted to show you something as I'm basting this. You can see my little stitches going on here. If I was to do this again, I think that it would be actually a better idea to go ahead and interface this entire front panel, okay? And that is because as I'm sewing this, I'm running into the edges here and everything, and it's not really going to be a big deal. But it does complicate things a little bit because this one side wants to move and everything like that. So just a thought, if you're going to try this and everything, my suggestion is to go ahead and interface this entire piece. If anything, it'll just give it a little extra support, and since we're using it as a coat, a little extra is always good. You know, if you're using it as a dress, well, that is honestly up to you, but that's just my opinion. Alright, so before I stitch this, I wanted to show you, this is my basting coming around this curve, you know, kind of clipping it and forming it and everything as I go. And this is up around the princess seam. It's kind of like this one goes this way and then below it goes this way, so you have two different directional curves going on. But I do think that the basting is going to help, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch this. Okay, so I have the shoulder and side seam sewn on the blue part, which is a lot easier than that front one. But I wanted to show you something important. This point here, this is the front, where this little oval shaped dart meets this other dart, this little point right here. It's really important that that point on this side lines up with this point here, where this line here, this seam line from when we put this on, meets up with our 5/8 inch seam allowance, okay? Because when those two don't match up, it looks weird on the other side. I had to adjust something before I got that exactly right. So when they do line up though, when you open it up, on this side, this line is going to meet up with where these two seams are, okay? And that's what we want. So just pointing that out. This, I do still need to press this seam allowance open, and I will do that in just a moment, but let me put this up on the dress form after I pull out this big basting thread along the bottom, just so we can see what it looks like. Alright, so this is the back, and you know, ignore all the wrinkles. Once it has the shoulder pads and support and everything, it'll be better. I opened up that basting so we can see the big flare in the back that it's going to have here. And in the front, come on, turn for me, honey. I just have it kind of pinned together where these buttons are, and this is what she looks like right now. I'm in my mind mentally thinking of stabilizers and structural things, and I will let you know what I come up with. Okay, I'm looking at the instructions, and the next step is to deal with a stay. and they want you to use like a seam binding or something. I'm using twill tape. Twill tape does not stretch at all, very secure. This is, you know, a fat 1/4 inch wide. I think it's going to be fine. And the stay is basically like a belt kind of on the inside. It's going to take the brunt of the stretching that wants to happen at your waist when you sit down or whatever, you know. It's going to take the brunt of that so the seams don't have to, in general. But because the pattern is made for a side opening and I am doing a front opening, I need to mark mine a little bit differently, but the proportion should be the same. I need to show you, like here is my center back, and my placement at my center back is at the point where this comes together and meets this, and it's kind of hidden down here, but it's at this point where all things come together. Okay, that's the point this tape joins on here. But when I pull that across and use my markings and everything to get it on here, I seem to be about a seam allowance short, measuring it out the way I did over here. And I'm not too sure, it might be something in the way that I converted from a dress to a coat and all of that. That could definitely be. But while I'm doing all this, I'm wondering if I actually need this, because usually you put a stay in when it is an enclosed dress, and this was supposed to be a dress that you pull over your head, and not usually for a coat. And since it is a coat, I'm wondering if I actually even need this on here, because it's going to be a lot more flowy and it's going to be able to unbutton in the front and everything. So I might just not put it on, because I would need to cut another one that extends all the way to the edge, because this won't work. And yeah, I think I'm just going to skip this step. But if it was a dress, or like a formal gown or something, you usually put these stays on a gown that has a fitted bodice and things like that. Because yeah, they are really handy for that. But for a coat, I'm not too sure that I'm going to. But what I want to do next is, before I start sewing my lining onto my coat, or my sleeves is probably my next bet, I want to somehow give a little more structure to this, because if it's going to be staying upright like this, I can see that my lining is kind of floppy up there. This is kind of floppy. I am going to put a little bit of a stabilizer right here. All right, so I've been playing with my bag of tricks here, trying to figure out what I want to do. And first I got my horsehair out, which I actually am going to use around the hem, because I think that'll be nice. And I was thinking of using that, but it's not sturdy or stable enough for this, for holding this collar up. That's what I'm looking for. So I got a piece of boning out. It's like, well, I'm just going to sew some boning up there. But that's going to be too heavy, and it's going to poke into my shoulders. I don't like that idea, so I'm putting the boning away. So I got out my folder of buckram, because you know everyone needs a folder of various weights of buckram, you know? And this one was just too much. But I think this weight, and it's like made for like hat making and things like that. It's very thick, it's a woven, okay? Like, picture a very open woven muslin that has just been super, super coated in a really thick starch. That's what buckram is. And I think what I'm going to do, this is my thought right now, is this entire little back piece here, this thing, I am going to, with the exception of the seam allowance on the top, put that in buckram. And I'm just going to hand whip stitch it on. Okay, and give myself, I will trim it down so the seam allowance is not with this stuff. But I think that if the back collar is sturdy enough to stay upright, the front can do its gentle fold that way, like this one kind of folds over, and I think that'll be nice. But it's really important this back part stays up. So I am going to go ahead and just try to trace through here. In general, you know what? No, what I'm going to do is get my pattern piece out that I used to cut this, and cut out a pattern piece out of this, just one layer. Alrighty, so this is my buckram, and you can see I've trimmed it down so that I won't have it in the seam allowance. But I do have it all the way matching up to the very bottom edge, okay? Because like, this is that piece down there. And that is because if I put it all the way down here, this is going to be flat up against my body. That's going to help it wanting to stay upright, is my plan. And so right now I'm deciding how I'm going to attach it, and I have just decided for right now I am going to stitch witchery this bad boy on here, because when I come back, I can come back and just tack it on in a couple places where it might be weaker. But when I actually sew it, I'm thinking I'm going to catch the very edge of this and it'll be in place permanently that way. But for right now, I'm just going to put some stitch witchery around here just to hold it in place so I can move on. All right, I want to show you, I have that fused on here with the stitch witchery, and look, that back of that collar is not going anywhere. And so that goes all the way to just past this seam here. And so, if I can get her to turn again, I can be really confident this seam's going to stand upright. And then this will just fall wherever it may, and that is fine. But now I know I'm going to have the popped collar that I want, so we are good. Okay, so now there is this piece number 14. And where this went is when the dress was going to have a side opening, and now I can see very faintly their side opening. This, it was going to have snaps down here, and this would be like a little under placket that's going to stick out to make sure there's no skin showing if it pulls, okay? So I don't need it for that, but I'm thinking I am actually going to use it for something kind of similar, but to put just behind where these two buttons are. So before I can connect the lining to the jacket front, I'm going to need to do that. And so what I'm going to do, if I fold this piece in half, it actually works out to just about the right height. So like say there's a button here and a button here. It actually works out really good. So this is on a fold, but this is open, so I'm just going to sew over and down, and then I can trim my corners and flip the whole thing right side out. Okay, so I have sewn over and down, and then I just ironed it. That sets that seam, takes out any puckers, relaxes everything, and makes it nice and neat. So now I'm going to trim off around these corners. I think those scissors are about done. And over here, trim off around that corner, flip it right side out, and then I'm going to press it one more time to try to make this as flat as possible. And if it doesn't hold flat, I may top stitch it, but I think it will. And what I'm going to do is just pick a side, and I am just arbitrarily picking this side. And here's my two buttonholes. I'm going to center this over those buttonholes, actually right about here, and stitch it on at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I don't want it to be, you know, too big because I don't want that to show. But when I sandwich it with like the facing and then open it, it will stick out like that, so that if I put the other side on top of it and they have the two buttons, they shouldn't see a gap. That's the goal, that's the thinking. All right, so I'm going to skip over and start working on these sleeves. Now these are my new pattern pieces, remember? And so the first thing I need to do is punch my little hole right here so I can make that dot marking. But I am going to do these in two separate sections. So I will do a blue sleeve on the right side, a blue sleeve on the left side, a white sleeve for the right side, a white sleeve for the left side, okay? You only need to see one because it's going to be the same process pretty much until it's not. So this is my sleeve front, so I'm going to make sure before I actually remove this that I do come through and clip my notches, and it is a 2-part sleeve. First thing is get all of my pieces separated into the proper place so it's all rights and lefts and whites and blues. Okay, so just like for everything else, I serged around the edges of the white pieces, but not around the blue pieces. And now what I'm doing for this one, I'm going to do for the other sets also, which is pin the center of these sleeves together, sew it at 5/8, and then press this seam allowance open, just like that. Okay, so I have the blue front and back of my sleeves sewn together, seam allowances pressed open. Right here there's like a flare and then knot, and I clipped it so that will lay easier. But I want to show you one thing. You know how I adjusted the size of my sleeve? Well, there is a sleeve facing piece that now does not fit, and it is this one down here, this piece number 11. And I had cut it out, you know, just based on the original, but it's not going to fit. So I'm going to have to trace out a new little sleeve facing pattern, but I can make it so that it's basically the same general guidelines as this one. So I'm going to put a little notch here where the top should be, a little notch here where the top should be, and right about here, okay? And just connect those, and then I can outline that on a piece of tracing paper. Cut 2 new pieces of blue, just single pieces, and I will be right back. So I just have it kind of sitting here. My weights are holding it in the right position so that it's nice and flared and flat. And I am just going to outline it down here, across. The same thing, put my little notch there, up, and whatever this height is, well, hang on, I'll show you. So there is my bottom edge. Now I can measure this right here and see that that height is right there. Okay, I actually have my ruler upside down. That's okay, it's the same on the other side. So these two will match, which is good. And the height of this facing is about 4 5/8. So if I come down here in the middle and put 4 5/8, and then somewhere about halfway in between, I should be able to come up with a guideline to connect all of them. Okay. So I can just kind of eyeball this up here, between this, here, and here. All right, and on this side, I have a notch right here, and over here, I also have a notch right here. And no notches on the top. The bottom is just notched to itself. I'm going to ignore that right now. And this is my new pattern piece. I'll put this back in the envelope when I'm done in case I need it. And I need to cut 2 of my blue out of this. Okay, so I got my lining sleeves sewn together on the outside here. And what I'm going to do now is, of course, very different from the instructions, but these facing pieces that I just cut, kind of like I did with the front facing, they're going to be just sewn directly on top of this. But what I need to do is fold under and press about 1/4 inch of the top, just to get a nice crease up there, because I'm going to be placing it on here and then top stitching it on up here and down and around. So my first step is on both of these facing pieces to turn under and press the top edge. All right, so when I pressed it, I had to make some clips because it's kind of an extreme curve in order to make it be able to fold down flat. But this one I have already pressed and pinned on here, and I'm making sure that I also pin down on both sides of the seam allowance so it's going to stay put while I stitch it. So I'm just going to kind of edge stitch along the top here with my blue thread, and then come down, around, and up at about 1/4 inch seam allowance on those outside edges. I'll do the same thing for both of these lining sleeve pieces. So this is my lining piece here with my facing sewed to the bottom, and this is my regular fashion fabric piece. And my next step is I'm going to sew the bottoms together. So I'm just going to line these up, very carefully pin them together so that the seams in the center match and my edges. Sew it at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is come back with my pinking shears and trim the bulk out of the lining piece that has, you know, a couple layers together there. So I can see what I'm doing better on this side. I'm peeling back my regular layer, and I'm actually going to trim it fairly close. I'm just going to lay the back side of my pinking shears up against that seam line and trim it pretty close because I want to get as much bulk out of this as possible, because this is going to be very noticeable right down there by the edge of the sleeve. Okay, so by the time I'm done, I just have that much peeking out, which is, you know, a little less than 1/4 inch. And now it is understitching time. So what that means is I'm going to be folding this whole seam allowance over here towards the lining side. Okay, so it's going to be folded this way, and I'm going to be making stitches right here, sewing on the lining side. Hang on, let me flip this. Okay, so here's my lining side. Up here, I'm going to be doing a row of stitching right down here, probably, you know, just edge stitching it about a 1/16 or an 1/8 inch in, but making sure all of this stuff stays over there. That's going to make it want to give me a nice edge when I'm all done. So I'm just going to start my machine and head straight down. All right, so this is what it looks like from the right side. There's my stitching. This is what it looks like from the wrong side. It's just going to hold the whole thing over. And the goal of that is that when my sleeve is folded, none of the stitching comes through, it sits a lot flatter, it just really makes that edge a whole lot better. But before we can do that, we have to sew the sides together. So, again, being very careful to match this part up right here so that those match up well. I'm going to put a pin right there really quick so that it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, and starting way up at the top and going straight through, getting both. So I'm going to start probably up here, starting here, do 5/8 of an inch in, come down all the way through, being careful to keep these seam allowances going the right direction, and all the way through to this side. So I have it sewn straight down. So at this point, what we need to do is open it up and stick a sleeve roll inside of here, as we do, and iron it all the way down, pressing this seam allowance open. Okay, so now that it's all pressed open, I'm going to try to very carefully pull it so that it is right side out. I'll just pull my sleeve through, that's fun. And get this edge down here all straightened out. There, hang on a second. Flap it out there, and you can see the shape of it here and how that understitching really helps to pull the rolling over the edge of the cuff there and give it a nice edge. So inside there you see the lining. On the outside is the fabric. I'm going to go ahead and pin it onto the dress form, and then we would call it a night for tonight. All right, so this is what we have so far. They're just pinned up on the top shoulders, just kind of holding it together there. It's a very interesting shape, but it's not done yet. So I'm going to wait to withhold judgment on this big old collar until it's all done. See you tomorrow. Morning. All right, so I took a day or so off because I had things to do, but I'm ready to go ahead and go to the next step. So I've been strategizing on the best way to do this, and what I think I'm going to do is take my little sleeves off with their pen here, is work on combining the lining with the jacket first, which is basically I'm going to sandwich them together and sew all the way around this way. Once I have the lining and the fashion fabric, you know, understitched and everything's really nice and pretty and everything this way, then I'm going to sew the sleeves on, just the blue part, just the fashion fabric. I'll shove the lining inside of it, and so then I can set the sleeve really nicely. And then after that, I'll flip the whole thing inside out, and I can just connect around the whole armhole by hand, the lining of the sleeve to the lining of the bodice. That's my plan. So the first thing this morning is to go ahead and layer these two together. So what I need to do to make sure that I can hem it once I have it all together and it's hung up and everything's resting where it wants to, I am going to leave, I'm going to say, the bottom 6 inches open. So I'm only going to start sewing from this point up on each side. So that way I can come back and adjust my hems and make sure everything is perfect at that point, but I don't need to really worry about it right now because sometimes things settle differently, you know? So I'm going to stick a pin there and at all my landmarks. This is that little flap here, and I'm actually thinking that, well, I'll show you when I get to the buttons. This is going to come in very useful for the buttons, I believe. So let me go ahead and pin it up here. There are some notches and everything, but I'm just hitting my main landmarks first of my shoulder seams and things like that. All right, so now that I have it pinned all the way around, I'm going to start at one side, sew it at 5/8 of an inch all the way around, trying to be real careful up here to keep my seam allowances open as nicely as I can and work my way through. I will be right back. All right, so I've got it sewed, and before I trim anything, I just wanted to open it up and make sure that everything is good. And I got to my back of my neck, and for some reason I thought I had it matched up well, but my seams are a little bit off. They are both set in. This is my lining down here, about 1/4 inch. Now I don't think it's going to make any difference in the world. I have no idea why that happened, but you know what? I am not going to worry about it. It is what it is. So since it looks okay, I am going to go ahead and, just like I did at the edge of the sleeves, I am going to pink the lining side of this seam allowance so that when I understitch it, it's going to roll nicely towards the lining. So this part down here, I'm not going to do that yet because I want that to be available when I'm doing my hem. But I'm going to get started, let's call it like right about here. Okay, so this side I'm pinking down just about like that, and I'm going to do that all the way around. All right, so this is all trimmed, and what I'm going to need to do now is understitch it. But I want to look at my right side while I do it, just because up around the neck there's so many curves that I want to make sure it looks good on the right side. So I'm going to carefully iron this a little bit before I do that, and I need to press my whole seam allowance towards the lining side. All right, so once I get it so it kind of wants to lay that way, then it'll be a lot easier to put it up here on my machine. So when the ironing is done and the seam allowance is going this way, I'm going to come back and, just like on the sleeves, do my row of stitching right about here on the inside. This is my facing, all the way around the whole collar, and then ending up down on the bottom on the other side. All right, no lie, that was a little bit tricky up around the neck where all of these big swoopies were, but got it done. So let's pull it all out here and see what she looks like. My hope is that I'll have a nice edge, which so far looks good. Up here where this seam is at the collar, got a little thick, and that's because I have that buckram underneath there. But I think we're still okay, and I will be pressing this part here just to make it want to stay down. I think it's going to work. Yeah, the back of the collar is definitely going to need some pressing work from me because of all that super stiffener that I have right here. So let me go ahead over to my ironing board, press my edge now, and I'll put it up on my dress form and take a peek. All right, here she is. And I can say that the collar is much better turned out than trying to get that straight up thing. I don't think that that's humanly possible. I think this is how it's going to go. If anything, I can hold it up for dramatic effect for a photo, but this is what it's going to want to do, and I'm fine with that. That's actually, I think, what it looks more like on the yellow version right here, if you can see how it's flopped down. I think that's actually more accurate than this, but here we go. So I just pinned it together, and these two edges are going to be meeting right here. Okay, that little flap that I added on down here, I am going to sew my button for this side onto that flap. This side, I will just sew the button over here, and it's going to be just a decorative button, but not actually a functional button. These will be the functional buttons, and I'm actually going to put a little coat hook on the top and bottom too, just to make sure it's not going to want to go anywhere. But you can kind of get an idea. I'm not really 100% happy with the edge. I wish it was a little crisper, and I might work with that a little bit more, but I will be putting that fur lining on the inside like this, but fur, and so I think that's going to kind of camouflage all of that. So I'm not going to stress about that right now. But in general, understanding we will be adding shoulder pads, so the shoulders will be more, you know, padded. Here is my side, so you can see all of the little style lines. We got all kinds of darts pulling in here, and it's wanting to pull everything there. So I'm seeing some little lines here, and that might just be the way it has to go, because this point here is all the stress. Everything comes here. It's like a starburst, you know. But then we have our vent opening. You know you can't see that. And more pleats. There's darts everywhere. So many darts. But this is it so far. So what I'm going to need to do is on the inside here, I need to finish off these buttonholes on the inside so they can be functional. So while I have this here, I'm going to go ahead and pin above and below each one of these buttonholes just to make sure that the fabric is in place where it needs to be, so that I can go on the inside, cut those open, and secure them in the right place. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and take it off and put it back on the table. So this is the side that the buttons are just decorative, and I'm going to go ahead and sew them on. I did this one, and I need to make sure that they are upright because we want our little emblem upright, but I need to pull out my little threads that are holding it together. If these come open a little bit, that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything, but the stitching on the button should keep it closed. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to try to make it so my knot does not appear by starting it with my knot on top, actually. Like this, and then my knot's going to be underneath my button, so all is good. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this one on, then we'll get started on the other side. All right, I am playing with buttons and things over here, and I've made a decision. I am going to make all 4 of these buttons non-functioning buttons. I just think that if these are non-functioning and these are, and this side starts pulling, it might not be the best. It might look different, you know. I don't know for sure, but at this point, why not just try to keep it safe? So this is my plan. These are coat hooks. They are like hook and eyes, but they're heavier. These are like a smaller coat hook. I have some that are like that big, but what I'm going to do is on the eye part, I'm going to open up a couple stitches in here and bury that inside there. So the only thing that's sticking out is the little, oops, upside down, is the little eyelet, okay? I want it so that my little eyelet's going up. You can see they're kind of swooped, okay? So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna sew the 2 buttons over here, just get that out of the way. Put my eyelets, bury them in the seam. Pretend the eyelet part is invisible. And these 2 are buried in the seam, and I'm just gonna hand stitch them in carefully like that, okay? And then on this side, I can put my big eyes, or my big hooks, underneath here. And I'm gonna put them, oops, in the same location as where the buttonholes are. Or so that way, if it pulls, it kind of gives the impression it's pulling on the button, even though it's not. Morning, it's been very busy around here. Got a lot of things going on, so I'm just trying to find little segments that I can come back in my room up here and get working on things. So I just sewed on the other 2 buttons, and I'm gonna really quickly try to get those hooks inserted, so I thought I would show you as I'm working on that. So ironically, the first thing I need to do is take these buttons back off because I wasn't thinking straight, and I need to be able to get inside here and open this up. Okay, so now that they're off, with my little pencil, my little chalk pencil, I just made a couple little marks where the top and bottom openings for these little eyelets should be. And so since I can open this all the way up and reach in here now, I'm just going to get my cute little seam ripper and try to pick out these threads inside here through my understitching also, so that I have it open just between those 2 little dots. My, what lovely stitching I did. Okay. Tell you what I actually need to do is get that understitching out first. So I am just going to put 2 little pins through my dots. This is not the right way to do it. If I knew what I was doing at the beginning, I probably would have done something in a slightly different step, but it's going to work out. Okay, so with my pins there, I can see where my opening needs to be, and I can pick these little threads out. All right. So now that the understitching threads are loosed and free, now I should be able to get in here and get these little threads out. Yeah, that's a lot looser. So I can pick them out, and I'm going to do that on both this top one and this bottom one right here. Okay, so I just pushed this one in. What I'm doing is I'm taking my little hook with the swoopy side up. You can see they're kind of angled, you know, this is the little swoop up. And I'm going to insert it so just the little end piece of it like that is sticking out. And now what I need to do is kind of open everything up here and sew it into that seam allowance on the inside so it's not really visible. So if I can pinch that and pull everything back out, get my needle and thread, and see right here is where I picked that opening, you know, and I can't really see it because it's sandwiched between these seam allowances in here, but I can feel it. And because these are such big loops, I'm going to be able to, with my needle and thread inside the seam allowance so it won't be seen, just anchor that eyelet in right here. All right, so on the inside here, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of draw little circles where those eyelet holes are so that I can see it easier, because this is very, very thick and hard to gauge just exactly where it is without it. And I'm using just, you know, some decent quality thread to anchor it on, and I'm just going to make several stitches in here, first down one eyelet and up the other one, just to hold it still while I'm working, and then I'll probably do a few around this one and a few around that one and anchor it in. Once I'm done with that, I'll come back with my blue thread and close up this little bit where I opened, just so that it's nice and clean all the way across there. Okay, so these are all sewn back in, and I did come back and sew the blue across here where I had the opening. So it should be nice and secure. If I try to tug on these, they're going to hold really well. So that is good. I'll put those buttons back on in a minute. All right, so I have my two sides lined up now, and this is the side with my little eyelet. So if I place this where I want it to be, I can kind of feel where the end of that eyelet is, and it's about, I'd say, 1/4 inch in. So I'm going to make a little mark across here at about 1/4 inch. That should show where this edge is, okay? So if I take my hook and I place it so that the very tip of that hook is at that line, I can figure out a way, because this is very thin. I'm just going to stick a couple straight pins through those holes where they should be anchored. Okay, so I've got my 2 straight pins there holding it on. All right, so if I push these through on this side, I can mark on this side really clearly where I need to put a little crosshatch lines that way, showing where it needs to end. So there's kind of like a letter H here. Get my hook out. So that means I need to line up my hook and sew it on so it's like this, okay? And that's going to give me my placement. So I can do this. This is so thick. I can do this with, you know, a lot of blue thread that's going to kind of match it here, but not having to go all the way through this side. So my stitches won't show on this side, but down here I can anchor it really well. So I'll be sewing around each of these eyelets, and I'll probably put a little bar tack around the very top to hold it secure up against the top also.
Living my bucolic life, healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn, then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses, the view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.